misinformation. I would first like to welcome our moderator for this session, Ms. Ruby Dhingra, Managing Editor, Newschecker. And now welcoming our panelists for this session, we have with us Mr. Baybars Orsek, Director, International Fact-Checking Network, Mr. Govindraj Ethiraj, Founder, IndiaSpend, Mr. Rajesh Kalra, Executive Chairman, Asianet News Media and Entertainment. Welcome all of you. Dear delegates, please keep asking your questions in the chat box. The panel may pick a few and answer to you in the end. Over to you, Ms. Dhingra.
Well, thank you very much. Let's get straight in. Misinformation is something that has been around for as long as people have had language to communicate, and information at that point of time used to travel by word of mouth, and now it flows from the tips of our fingers as we type away into our smartphones. And interestingly, 73% of Indians are already using their smartphones to access news, and that number is projected to go up to 974 million smartphone users in India by 2025. So just trying to put out some numbers for our panelists, with, just to put it into perspective of just to what extent misinformation is facilitated and even exacerbated by the fact that so many people now are getting their news from phones. And before I get to my panel, I have a few more numbers for you to consider. 82% people that have been surveyed by the Reuters Institute in their latest report on Digital News Report 2021, which was released just over the last few days. 82% people said that they get their news online, and this includes people who are getting their news from social media. But if you see social media alone as a source of news, that accounts for 63% Indians out of the total number of people who have been surveyed who are getting their news only from social media. And that, of course, is followed by television, which is at 59%, and people who are using print as a source, a primary source for their news consumption, which is at 50%. And it is this realm of social media that we're going to talk about, which is also a realm of anonymity, where there is lack of immediate screening, and it offers something that is not available to traditional media, print and television certainly, the capacity to go viral at an unimaginable speed. But this information or misinformation, as we're discussing today, also has real world consequences, as we've seen over the last few years, whether there have been examples of rumors of child kidnapping or cattle related stories, and a lot of it even during the pandemic now, in terms of how we're dealing with COVID. In this context now, we're going to have this conversation today on the need to establish trust in the times of misinformation. My panelists today are Baybars Orsek, Director of the International Fact-Checking Network, Govindraj Ethiraj, Founder, IndiaSpend and Boom Live, and Rajesh Kalra, Executive Chairman of Asianet News Media and Entertainment. And I want to start with opening comments from our panelists first. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking out the time for this conversation. And I want to jump right in. I have tried to offer a rather simplistic sort of an introduction to the problem of our times. And I was wondering if, Govind, I would like to begin with you. Why is it important to build trust in today's day and age? Why is this conversation essential? And why is this something that requires consistent and long-term effort?
Right. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Let's look at health and medicine as an example. And if you look at what we've been facing in the last 1 year, 2 or 3 kinds of problems. First, we obviously experienced wave 1 and wave 2 of a pandemic. We've experienced shortages in medicines, hospital beds, oxygen concentrators, and so on. And all of this has been compounded by a few other things, which is that people have not fully understood what the nature of this disease is and how deadly it can be. Secondly, even if they've understood to some extent, they've inevitably gone for alternative cures, medicines, which perhaps were not the right ones at the right time. And all of this has led to loss of lives. The third thing, which we actually addressed in a project which we called SOS India for that's 4numeral.u.com, is there was a plethora of helplines, particularly in the months of April and May, for again offering help for hospital beds, oxygen, medicines, and specific medicines like remdesivir or even plasma. But none of these were authenticated. Many of them were fake and or were not updated, and people were sharing them wildly, which in turn was leading to delays in people getting treatment and so on. So the problem, as you can see, is that there is an internet, which you talked about. there is a huge acceleration of information dissemination that's happened into hundreds of millions of people, which may have been tens of millions of people in India just a few years ago. And the result is that even if you were to use the lens of health and medicine, people have died. If to use the same another lens, which is, let's say, law and order, you use the example of child kidnapping, which was perhaps making India the only country where people were killed because of misinformation. And we at Boom and Fact Checker had counted almost 38 plus deaths of people across the country, across demographic, across socio-economic strata, in at least when it comes to the kind of place, villages, towns, cities, where people were killed only on the basis of information that they saw on WhatsApp, suggesting that some strangers walking into that village might be child kidnappers. So that's the nature of the problem, and that's how it's impacting us. And therefore, we need to figure out how to build trust. Now, we cannot answer that question, and not that I have all the answers, but if we don't ask, why did that trust get lost? Now, the loss of trust could have been accelerated because of the the rapid expansion of the digital footprint that we've spoken about. But the loss of trust happened to start with. My own feeling is that it happened in some ways because mainstream media has lost its way. And when I say mainstream, I don't mean all mainstream together, but I do mean that people with heft, people with influence, people with scale went off track, so to speak. A lot of content creation had nothing to do with news. And to the extent that people started then wondering whether most of it was relevant, useful, or even true. So you have a situation where people were out sensationalizing, people were out shouting, and people were out curating. And all of that, and this has happened in the last 10 to 15 years, has led us to a point that most people, and particularly younger people, don't trust news at all. So I can come to the solutions later, but I think this is the nature of the problem, and this is the reason we're getting impacted, whether it's law and order or health or medicine, which is very current and present for us right now.
Right. I'm going to take that to Baybars. In fact, why is it important to build trust? As Govind was also saying, this is essentially, as Govind has given an Indian context, this is essentially a global problem, and local contexts will be different in different locations, but it is a global issue.
Of course, it's such a global issue that we are trying to address as the International Fact-Checking Network, and I'm really pleased to be, one of the speakers here today in this panel, since the International Fact-Checking Network has more than 15 verified signatures from India, and the country itself, with the scale of its the capacity of fact-checking organizations, and also the challenges that have been experienced there. It's a big priority for us, so we really are keen to address the challenges that we see in India that our fact-checking organizations partners are addressing there. But maybe just from a more global point of view, I can talk about how fact-checkers try to address that need of trust. The fact-checking, the practice of fact-checking has been here for a while. I mean, it even goes beyond the early days of the internet, when there were the email lists were circulating online. You might remember those days. I'm kind of old enough to receive those nonsense emails that are basically talking about conspiracy theories and everything, and then you start to experience some sort of online fact checking, especially with the rise of the internet. And you mentioned about the bulk of mobile news consumers in India, especially in a country where the internet connectivity is increasing very rapidly. People are turning into their smart devices to get their news. In the past, it was more the newspapers or the TV stations that we were getting our news from. I remember the old days when I was watching TV with my parents, just tuning in onto the evening news and getting the news every day on a given period of time. And at that time, you had those gatekeepers, somehow having the credibility to tell you what's happening in the world, what's happening in your country. And obviously, as everything has changed with the rise of internet, the way that we consume our news also have changed. With this enormous supply of information out there, then there's obviously a lack of credible and authoritative information as well. So that's how fact checkers have become a go-to resource for those who are doing journalism and trying to get to the bottom of the information, whether it's true or not. I mean, Govin just made a couple of very important remarks on the importance of fact checking, especially in cases where online misinformation can hurt lives. So that's why we, as the fact checkers, are, well, at least should be at this front of this, struggle to increase trust, because at the end of the day, we are in a position to make a verdict about the information that we focus on. So we either say this information is not true, this information is false, and especially with the growing scrutiny of our work, unfortunately, many governments around the world, including my home country, Turkey, consider fact-checking as an agent of censorship. Also, the country of my residence, the United States, see, especially in the during the previous administration, it was seen as censorship, agent of censorship by the former president, just because sometimes fact checkers do publish their findings and they don't make the people in power happy. So we need to counter these accusations by making sure we are transparent as much as possible. We put so much emphasis on building trust by showing our methodology to our readers and make sure every reader can replicate the work that we do, can be their own fact checkers and hold the fact checkers into account. Because journalists, fact checkers, as the people, as the professionals who make their judgments and share their findings with the people, needs to make sure that they can build that trust by making sure others can fact check them. So this is very important, and we are trying to make sure we can be a good example in building this trust to other parts of the journalism industry as well.
Right, thank you. I'm going to actually take that to Rajesh, but I want to add a little bit of information here. I'm going to quote the same report, the Reuters Institute's latest report, because that's the latest data that's available. It says that trust in overall news in India is at 38%, so that's not very high. And India ranked 31 out of 46 markets in terms of trust that people have in news. The United States ranked last with 29%. Also, why focus on building trust at this point of time? And also, I mean, is it essential for the survival of organizations, for democracy to thrive, for, or multiple reasons? So why is it essential to build trust?
So thanks, Ruby, and good morning, everyone, for having me here to discuss this very important topic. As Ruby, you said right in the beginning, misinformation has been in existence everywhere, and perhaps it's been like that forever. However, as you yourself said, the current context, what has changed is the speed at which it propagates itself. And it also seems that for certain sections of the society, it could include businesses, politicians, and perhaps even personal enmity, it is beneficial too. Perhaps beneficial is an understatement. We all know how things have evolved. And as two very distinguished panelists have said before that, the social media and the tremendous growth that digital has seen has only hastened the pace at which information is growing, and so is misinformation. There is just too much information floating around that lacks authenticity. And this, coupled with vested interest, as I said, and sometimes ignorance, ensures the exchanges are getting shriller. So divided is the society that we now have that it tends to believe only what suits them. Therefore, if the falsehood is what my belief tallies with, I will only accept that without a question. And it doesn't end there. I'll also end up doing everything possible to propagate it and make it big. So I think once upon a time, social media was a boon. Now social media and the growing digital industry is a double-edged sword. Misinformation and the speed of its propagation now can fool anyone. All of us are aware of what happened between Portugal footballer Ronaldo and Coca-Cola a few days back. Everybody in the world went to town how by just swatting away two Coke bottles during his pre-match media interaction, Coke lost about $4.5 billion. The whole world went crazy sharing drafts and all else. But that was not the truth. The thing is that Coca-Cola's market value was already down 4 billion even before that action by Ronaldo. Because the fact is that the entire US stock market was trading low at that time, and Ford company, for example, Ford Motors was itself down by more than a $2 billion in market value at the time. But how many of the publications and social media influencers actually cared to check? All happily went with the narrative. Although corrections came later, I can bet 9 out of 10 people in the world do not know the latter development, that it was because of what was happening in the stock market and very, very little to do with what Ronaldo did. And I'm sure even years from now, 10 years from now, when people talk about this incident, they will talk about how Coke went down because Ronaldo swatted aside 2 bottles. So as everybody has been discussing, how does one gain trust in this age? Govind has raised very interesting issues with what was happening in India during the pandemic, and we have been, Baybars has been talking about issues. All these things are only gaining currency in not only in this country but all over the world. We really have to worry. Once upon a time, as a journalist, I was just a messenger, and there were opinion writers. Everybody believed news the way it came, and opinions were supposed to shape opinions, but they were very clearly told these are opinions. All believed us. But what is happening now? Consumers have access to abundant information, and in any case, a journalist never behaves like a journalist again. All journalists now behave like opinion writers. The first line itself tries to impose their opinion on readers. So to gain trust, we have to do things differently. We have to be transparent in the way we do things. And as they say, I just don't have to be doing things right. I have to be perceived as doing the things right as well. We have to be seen as somebody who is totally non-prejudiced, show that we are transparent, and it has to be sustained. We can't betray biases in what we say and how we say and what we do, what we show. There are popular anchors in English and Hindi and other regional languages in India who will give a slap to a development, depending on their bias. All these things are noticed. And all these things need to be addressed if you want to win people's trust back. That is exactly, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
I actually want to take that to Baybars, just to explore a little bit more about, what are we up against? What are some of the things that people are complaining about as consumers? There are people, as Rajesh pointed out, many think that journalists don't care about getting it right. There's also the problem of prioritizing speed over accuracy, right? I mean, I come from a TV background, so I'm more in tune with the 24/7 news cycle. Are journalists then themselves to blame for the the delegitimization of mainstream media? And this is happening the world over. A lot of people are now looking at journalists as having political leanings, and while there are bad actors everywhere, there are enough good actors. What are some of the examples of this and some steps that can be taken or have been taken globally that you would like to share?
Sure. So I guess as the time passes, we kind of, distance ourselves from the understanding that, mis and disinformation is only a form of, actions caused by, foreign actors. I think that was like the main, perception back in, 2016, especially I'm talking about like a much more like, probably much more like in the US, focus approach when it comes to, the whole discussions around like, fake news, the election of like, Donald Trump, the importance of like, Facebook and the Russian agents. But I think it's not the reality right now. I mean, there are so many different reasons why we see mis and disinformation. And as we just like, touched on earlier today, lack of trust is one of the key factors why we have misinformation. People resort to misinformation when they don't have trust into institutions, when they don't have trust into media outlets. So then one of the reasons that's why misinformation occurs. And there's also this coordinated efforts to spread disinformation, to deceive people, to basically hurt private companies, to pretty much hurt governments. And there is a wide spectrum of reasons and motives behind mis and disinformation. From a media point of view, we have seen, especially in the last couple of years, that larger media houses investing a lot in their fact-checking efforts right now. Especially once media outlets are competing against each other in speed, in accuracy. Some good examples around the world, like the New Yorker. They are currently, as far as I know, are hiring 25 different fact checkers for the editorial team. So when we talk about fact checking, there's also the editorial part of fact checking, just to make sure the news are right, the statistics, the figures, the references in those stories are accurate. So they have that process to fact check their articles before they publish them. So they don't need to resort to corrections or changes after they publish things. So, but on the other hand, the amplification is kind of a side product of this, need to have speed in publishing. And many outlets around the world, unfortunately, resort to copy and paste journalism. They basically use the same content with some, minor adjustments, if at all, and then spread it to their own audiences. And therefore, you have a huge amplification where you see, because of lack of resources allocated in fact-checking, editorial fact-checking, outlets, whether they be like newspapers or TV channels or influencers, people with high reach, they just amplify the same piece of misinformation or disinformation, and you have millions of people consuming. As in the case of like Ronaldo and Coca-Cola, they just consume the same information, and worse, they basically amplify it. So we need to make sure that we, as the journalism industry, we prioritize quality over quantity. And focus on the quality of our information rather than the speed and the quantity of information. We are being targeted by indefinite number of information in a given day, and we just cannot, as users, we just cannot filter out the bad information from good information with our own skills. I mean, maybe some of us might be able to have those skills, but we need to integrate editorial fact-checking into our news production. That should be a big part of our fight against misinformation, because still, we like it or not, the mainstream media, or at least the conventional media, because like it's also debatable how we call mainstream media, but at least the conventional media and influencers on gatekeepers on the social media need to have those fact-checking skills, editorial fact-checking skills, just to make sure they got the story right and they don't necessarily spread disinformation just because they want to race against their competitors. The others with bad intentions are all a different story, which I think also needs so much scrutiny as well.
Right. I'll take that to Govind. Baybars has spoken about quality over quantity and having editorial fact checking in our newsrooms. Now, if I want you to talk about the Indian landscape, is this even feasible? Where speed over accuracy, it is given priority. Speed is given priority. So where is the scope of actually bringing that in?
Let me contextualize it the way I see it. I think, first of all, mainstream media is not the main culprit when it comes to misinformation. I mean, so even when we scan it, stories or pieces coming from mainstream media, I would think maybe 1% or even less than that in terms of either deliberate or accidental misinformation. So, but it's a very small component. So I don't, the problem is really outside it, right? And it's really cause and effect, because at least that's my feeling, that it's because mainstream media or conventional media, as Baybars called it, triggered the loss of trust, that you have an entire belief ecosystem, which is the entire other 99%, which is on WhatsApp and so on. So mainstream media is not the problem, but it can be the solution, because like I said, I think it triggered the problem. So what do people use if you go back? And of course, one is to look at life and say that everything has to evolve and products should change and media should become something else and all that. Okay, so that argument we know, whether it's an electric car or whether it's a supersonic aircraft or whatever, or the media product as we consume it. So life changes. The other is to say that maybe people only want simple things from a media product. They want news as it happened, news to be reported as it happened. They want knowledge. Knowledge as in maybe the very, very staid old BBC way of defining knowledge, which is maybe nature and so on. And they maybe want some sense of opinion and conversations and, to pepper things up a little bit. But if you were to look at, if media were to play that role, without getting into, like I said, curating, out opinionifying all the time, then maybe there is a role for media. But if media feels that, no, we've got to change, this is the new world, this is the vastly connected and interconnected world, and we've got to play a different role, then unfortunately, as I see it, we will continue to face this problem. Because people, you have to remember another thing, and I've been in television and we've studied this, or not studied, but let's say looked at these numbers. The number of people who get up every morning and want to know what's happening around in the world is very small, right? I think if you look at television numbers, I think it must be about 7 or 8% of, whereas 92% want to be entertained. Now, if we want to say that we want to grow the market by catering to the 92% by essentially entertaining them, which is what a lot of television tries to do on a daily basis, then you've essentially changed your product. Now, I mean, I cannot hold it against you for changing your product, but if you change it, this is what's going to happen. People expect something else. People start believing in something else, and eventually, as it's happened in the last decade or so, start losing trust in you, because they only come to you if they believe that you're already speaking something that they believe in, and essentially a confirmation bias, and therefore not serving the original purpose of what I think at least media should be. So to my mind, I think if you want to solve the problem, unfortunately, there is no solution but to get back to basics and reconnect with people, because the entire social ecosystem that we have today, which is large, is only existing because in some ways a problem started somewhere long ago. So I'll pause there. I'm sure Rajesh would want to come in and.
No, can I go on, Ruby?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, Govind makes a very interesting point because he's from the industry, and have seen the digital industry in this country, at least in the news business, evolve from 1997, 98, 99 to what it is now. Speed is what everybody demands, and speed is what leads to all these mess ups at times. And we have to build trust. There are fact checkers in the country and all over the world, but what happens is even the fact checkers sometimes are in speed to fact check something before anybody else can. So it becomes a very, very sad state when a fact checker has to fact check his own fact checked story and then make further corrections to it a few days later. That is when the trust in a fact checker also goes down. This has happened in a few cases. I'm not going to name those cases, but it has happened a few times. I'm sure Govind knows about those cases. These kind of things don't help. But the fact again is that the mainstream media, at least in India, has not fallen prey to it, because it still goes through a lot of layers of filtration because before the thing makes it at least in print. In digital, there is always this race to be the first, and sometimes the source who is supposed to be credible also feeds you information which could be wrong. And also, as I said, a lot of people and vested interests by now know that if you want to really ignite it, give it to a big influencer, it will reach everybody and all the media will also pick it up. I don't know how many of you remember, this was about 7-8 years ago. Kiran Bedi, who is known and everybody knows is the first woman IPS officer of India, was standing for elections. Few days before elections, a note came out, not a note, a press clipping came out which said that she was not the first women IPS officer in the country, but somebody else was. Or everybody used it because the thing looked so authentic with proper folds in an old newspaper clipping, and with the lines which are there with a pen mark and all. It was a fake. It was an app which allows you to build such things. Even newspapers got it wrong. So, but that was earlier. Since then, people are a lot more careful. But still, as Govind said, 92% of the people consume everything for entertainment, and 8% are doing it for news. I think it's even less than that, because most of the people are now consuming it through some source or the other. WhatsApp has become a huge source of information for people. I meet people who they say we got everything, everything that we need to know is coming to us through WhatsApp, some forward, and we don't read the newspapers and we don't read this. Now the challenge is there is so much of fake information which is doing the rounds. How do you make sure that what you are receiving is authentic or not? Even if somebody does a fact check and everybody says this was incorrect, I am not sure whether it reaches the percentage of people who got the fake information, if all of them get that information. And as you said right in the beginning, Ruby, misinformation the desire to come up with something which may not be completely true has been there forever. I remember when I started my career, one of the biggest thing in journalism used to be, can you break the budget? Can you scoop a budget? Okay, the budget is tomorrow morning. In the morning's paper, when the budget speech will be read by the finance minister, one paper will have these 20 points are being announced today. Anybody will know that out of those 20, I will get those 5 right also. If I speculate, if I just think about it, so they will put 20 points and 10 out of those will be right the next day. And then they will go to town saying how these 10, we got it right, we told you first. But nobody says that we actually messed up and confused you with the other 10 which didn't happen. Right?
So pointing again to the speed over accuracy, incentive.
So, trust is such a difficult thing to gain. It grows by inches and dies not by feet, it just disappears. And we really need to work very hard. As I said, one has to be totally non-prejudiced, because if a fact checker displays a prejudice, that's it. Then what will happen is you only cater to your side of your prejudice, not to the other side. And which is which is a problem all over. Whether you look at the US, you look at India, you look at wherever, all over the problem is you only tend to believe what tallies with your belief. That's all. Over to you.
I do have a follow-up question for you, Rajesh. I'm going to again refer back to the same report by the Reuters Institute, only because it's the latest that has come out of the last few days. Interestingly, it mentions that DD News and All India Radio government broadcasters have retained high levels of trust among consumers. And it also made another point, especially, referring to an English news channel, that despite its popularity may be high, but it also had the highest level of distrust.
Yes.
So,
I know the names you are.
Combine that with what Govind said, these are interesting observations. Would you like to comment on this?
So, I have always said, that if you want to watch only news and in your head, that you can discount some promotions, I would watch Doordarshan, because at least it gives me news. The rest of the channels, they start on something during the morning and they go on having it till the evening, and the actual news is a ticker somewhere. I actually watch because 2-3 things. One is, it doesn't frazzle me like a Cartoon Network does. And I can see what is happening. If they tell me what is happening, they can tell me in a very, very deadpan manner. They make the most exciting news seem absolutely boring. But that is up to me to decide. Okay, oh, this is fantastic. This has happened. The person may say it with a very deadpan voice. But what happens on the other places is you play up a thing so much. So very often you would see what has been, hogging headlines in a private channel the entire day finds a mention on page 9, column 3 in the paper the next day. It happens very often. So yes, I actually think that Doordarshan and All India Radio, if you take out the, what should one say, the
propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda out. At least they give me the news, and I have to be clear in my head that there would be some propaganda as part of it. It has always been there. That's what I want to say.
Baybars, Doordarshan is the equivalent of TRT, Turkish Radio and Television. Yeah.
That's right.
Public service broadcaster.
Right. So very interesting points that have been brought forth by all of you on how to counter this narrative and how to build trust. I'm going to...
Ruby, can I interject for a second?
Yes, of
See,
course.
but I feel that we should be a little careful. It's about how you frame the issue, right? I don't think the loss of trust is linked. Misinformation is obviously gets generated in a vacuum and perpetuates and spreads, but the lack of trust or the loss of trust is not because of misinformation. It's the other way around. So there was a loss of trust which led to a vacuum which causes misinformation to spread. And obviously much more so today than we know before. So to my mind, we still need to address the first part of the problem, which is not linked to misinformation existing in society. In the manner that you could define and say that it always existed, and that's fine. But I would draw, there's an A to B to C, and I would distinguish between, yeah.
Right. Okay. I wanted to actually move forth and discuss solutions, whether it's audience engagement, in which case, how how has this been tackled the world over, the question of audience engagement and using that to build trust? If Baybars would like to take that.
Sure. I mean, this is one of the reasons why like India has always been very fascinating for me as someone who is working with Indian factual organizations for more than almost 2 years, and being able to compare the different countries in our network. And India for sure is one of the countries that messaging apps play such a important role in the distribution of information. I totally hear and understand and also agree that mainstream or the conventional media doesn't necessarily have that role in the misinformation space in India, but it's just Govind said it might be one of the ways to reach a solution. Because if you don't have, especially in my own previous experience and my current capacity, I have seen a lot of cases where fact-checking organizations started to basically show to the mainstream media, to the conventional media, how to be better journalists. Almost half of the organizations in the network are still nonprofit organizations among IFCN's verified signatories. And especially in several parts of the world, they are kind of like watchdog and monitoring organizations that are primarily aiming to influence the media. Main organizations operate in a way to aim a change in their conventional media landscape. That's because those organizations have assessed that mainstream media or the conventional media can play a role in basically putting pressure on the political actors in the country to be better at their, statements or their, claims, and also have that watchdog role to make sure we hold these people into account. I come from a political fact-checking background, and I have been able to observe the growth of verification and debunking within the practice of fact-checking as well. So almost all of the organizations among IFCN's verified signatories do some sort of online misinformation debunking right now. Still, a big majority of those organizations also do political fact-checking, but not all of them. And I think we also need to be mindful about the challenges in political misinformation as well. And I'm not an expert in the context of India, but in many countries, what I have been able to observe is that the conventional media still plays a role in amplifying political misinformation. As you just said, the state-funded TV channels play a role in spreading propaganda all around the world. Even in the US, there was this debate about how the Voice of America would be, operating under the previous administration versus the current or the one before, the previous administration. So the state-funded media kind of has that role, in addition to media with ties to the government. So that's a challenge that I think we also need to always keep in our mind as fact checkers to make sure that we scrutinize the traditional media, the conventional media, in their role in legitimizing political misinformation, crediting political misinformation, and providing those pieces of misinformation, political misinformation, a space so they gain legitimacy. Many studies have shown that amplification starts, especially in online misinformation, they start in closed messaging apps, then they evolve into semi-closed groups such as Facebook or other platforms, and then they become much more visible on social media, let's say Twitter, or especially in recent years also YouTube plays a very significant role there, but they gain the legitimacy when they are picked up by the mainstream media. So maybe there, in that stage, mainstream media can play a role in making sure those pieces of misinformation, both online and political misinformation, do not get the credit they don't deserve. So that might be one of the goals that fact checkers partnering with larger media houses or larger media houses starting their own fact-checking units to make sure that they have at least better measures to control the amplification of those pieces of mis and disinformation.
I actually wanted to go back to Govind. He had mentioned that most people in the morning when they get up, they are seeking entertainment and not news. And, just I kind of agree. Most people outside, the group of journalists, they engage with news very differently. You can call it, a casual sort of a relationship that they have with news. If they get news on their phone about something from an app, they'll probably read the headline and they won't even bother fact checking. I'm pretty sure this, the Ronaldo example of Coke, I mean, must have appeared as a news update. Nobody would have bothered checking it. So while that's right, I do want to ask you, do audiences want to be engaged with? I mean, we can keep putting out the information of, how we are different, how any particular organization is different from the other. What are they doing to build trust? Are they being more transparent? You can put out your funding information. You can try to put all of that. So does the audience want to be engaged with? Does the audience want to know that we can trust a particular organization over the other? And how do you suggest we do it? Because if you want to do it over social media, because that is what will get, amplified the most, social media has already become a toxic space. So, I mean, there are lots of different challenges, I think.
Yeah, and I think you said it, you alluded to it in a way. I mean, maybe us journalists think too much of ourselves, right? And we assume that we are the world and the world revolves around us.
I
And
actually stopped myself from saying that outright.
yeah, but it's a fact. I mean, sometimes we assume that, what we work on and what we create and disseminate is read by everyone, is revered by everyone and respected. But it's not true. The numbers don't show that. And most people, like I said, don't want to know the news every morning. I mean, if you look at your own household as an extended household, I mean, find out how many people really want to know what happened yesterday world over before 9 a.m. I mean, I may take 6 papers. I'm sure Rajesh does, Baybars does, you do, but we're all part of the same community, so we want to know, and also about each other. So that, I mean, and it is an incestuous world, and there's nothing we can do. I think the answer, I mean, I don't know if there is an answer per se, but I think it is about the role that we think we serve and the role that people want us to serve. If we think of ourselves as entertainers and product innovators and so on, then I'm afraid we've lost the battle already. If we say that our role is to fundamentally source news as it happens without any salt and pepper over it, and just convey it as it is, maybe nicely packaged, no doubt, but not without any additions and subtractions, then I think we have a role to play. And many of us do play that role. It's not that we are not. I mean, many of the newspapers, including or groups that Rajesh belongs to, I mean, are performing that role on a daily basis, and people refer to them. Oh, Asianet said that this has happened in Kerala because they are more a regional this thing. I would surely trust them for that. Now, will I trust them for something that's happening in another part of the country? Maybe not, because I think the brand alignment is with that part of the country, the southwestern part of the country. So and every newspaper that we consume is also consuming that. I think where the problem is that if it's a 20-page newspaper, there is 6 pages of pure entertainment, which in turn is sponsored. There is other stuff. There is, of course, the spin that the people indulge in, because obviously they're maybe either worried about the government, scared about the government, trying to ensure that advertising doesn't stop. So, we have to go back. I mean, I cannot see any solution but to say that you go back to some amount of basics, do more of what you're already doing well, and don't fall into the prey of trying to bring entertainment audiences into your fold. Let entertainment audiences go to entertainment, and
Right.
and not try and convert them.
Sorry to cut you short. We have 7 minutes left on this discussion. I still have multiple questions, so I'm going to take that to Rajesh. You were speaking about no prejudices, but is the pursuit of objectivity, that journalists claim to have. Is that a problem in itself while reporting facts? Because if you're reporting the daily COVID numbers, yes, you can be objective, you can just report the facts. But, there are certain kinds of stories that, I mean, different themes have to be reported in a different manner. So, I mean, is the pursuit of objectivity a problem in itself?
Yeah, as I said right in the beginning in my remarks, Ruby, what has happened these days is you tend to believe what your belief is. I believe in a particular kind of narrative. I will believe whatever comes in and do everything possible to propagate that kind of a thing. That is happening all the time. Just look at the COVID reporting, for example. Uh, you know, I may not like whatever is happening at all places. I may not like what the government is doing. I may not like what the opposition is doing. But one thing is very clear, that when it suits me, I use the absolute numbers. And when it doesn't suit me, I use the percentage to say how badly or how bad or how good we are. All these things need to be kept in mind. People have to know, and people have started noticing these things, and they point out these things to you. He said, the other day you were showing us the absolute numbers. Now suddenly you have switched to percentage because it doesn't suit you. Now, what has happened is, even though I am giving the exact figure, I am not deviating from the figures at all. The manner in which I have presented it, the slant is so obvious that the person says, my trust in you is diminished because of that.
Right.
That is what is happening.
Right. Okay. I have a quick answer on this question that you have also. I think one of the panelists alluded to it earlier about the audience consumer not being uniform in India. Low media literacy levels, cultural biases have contributed, a lot to the problem. So, is there something that platforms like ours, can we do something about this to solve this problem? Increasing
Govind
media
talked about, people are not consuming news, but and as management and as owners, we want to look at more of entertainment and less of this. Fact is, I was running the largest online digital thing in the country till last year, and I can tell you, very few people on that platform. I may be the largest, but news is very, very small percentage of it. Very, very small percentage of
Right.
it. And if I have something which as journalists we would scoff at, never want it, that's the only thing which gives me 90% of my traffic. And that is
Right.
what gives me the revenues, and that is what gives the salaries to everybody, who work for me. So it's a very, very tough call.
It's a
But there are
dilemma.
people who are trying to keep their head out of water and saying we will only do honest journalism. It's very tough. And fact checking is easier said than done, because as I said, everybody, you will be hauled up by the editor if everybody else has done a story and you have not done the story. I don't
Yes.
know how many of you remember Bihar election, not this one, the previous one. Everybody said, what was that? There was something, I think NDTV even said, we are calling out that these guys have won. Half an hour later, the whole thing had changed.
Yeah.
I still remember we had our algorithm in place which showed that whatever everybody is saying was incorrect. So
Right.
my team kept coming to me every 5 minutes, sir. Everybody has it. Can we put it up? I said, hold on. I said, what was your plan A? This was it. What was plan B? This was it. I said, look at all these plans. We are not supposed to do what you want me to do. We
Right.
didn't do. And finally, everybody else had to eat crow. You guys remember, right? This happened for Bihar
Yes.
election, not this one, the previous
Very
one.
well. I was on the ground. I remember it very, very well.
Okay.
I
So
do
this
want
is
to
very,
give.
very tough.
I'm sorry for cutting you short. I just have 3 minutes. I want to club a couple of questions for Baybars. If there has been talk of transparency, also increasing diversity in the newsroom, which might help bringing different kinds of point of views and opinions inside the newsroom. Will that help? And a very important point, digital publishers are going behind a paywall, but where does a paywall fit in a world full of mistrust? So if you can address these issues, and
Sure.
how have the world over companies dealt with it?
So the paywalls, especially in the field of fact checking, is a question that we are recently, asking a lot to ourselves, like how to address that. Because, our code of principle, our IFSense, application process is one of you have to show your fact checks to our assessors and to the public eventually. So we can help fact checking organizations to build trust with their audiences, because you have to show your work to the audience to build that trust. I mean, without being able to show that, that's how it's going to work out. It's a complicated one, but at least many newsrooms, at least within our network, uses this freemium models where they share at least a number of piece of content in a month, and then they charge for you behind their paywall. So this is something that we see recently to address that complexity. From the diversity standpoint, diversity is very, culturally relevant. I mean, what you mean in, diversity might mean a different thing in the US than it does in India. It might definitely, mean something else in the UK than it does in Germany. So we are emphasizing the importance of diversity across among fact-checking organizations, newsrooms as well. But when it comes to, having that recipe, it all comes down to the fact that those organizations are willing to, have a much more diverse team in their outlet. So that is a challenge that I think can be also somehow overcome by diversity in audience as well. So the more a diverse audience you have, the more the diverse you might have a team, because you might need to address to that diversity. So our approach has always been to encourage organizations to diversify their audiences. Many organizations rely on at least one major social media platform to reach out to their audiences. The more they are diversified, I think it can also lead to much more diverse teams as well. And it can go both way, obviously. It's kind of like more like a chicken and egg question, but I think you should start from somewhere. And in terms of paywalls, I think this is one of the questions that the industry will need to address, and whether there's going to be like a Netflix model in the future where you can access to different type of outlets with one subscription, with some aggregators like Apple News, Google News, Facebook News, somehow trying to pilot in different countries. I think it's going to be an important experiment.
We've actually gone beyond our allotted time, but if I can take one more minute to ask both Rajesh and Govind for their one-line comment on paywalls. Do they have a place in a world full of mistrust?
I don't think paywalls have anything to do I don't think they are the solution to anything. Paywalls work for people who are, you can see it in many countries. There is extreme left-wing content and extreme right-wing content, so paywalls are only a way of connecting you with audiences who want to pay you for the effort that you're putting in. It does not in itself eliminate or bring in, what you want or what you
But will it exacerbate the problem, or will it? That was
no, I don't think it's exacerbated. I'm just saying that it's just a way of financially connecting with people who want to support you for the work you're doing. But it can work in all ways. It's not. I think I'm doing great journalism. Maybe there are people who believe in my objective and are able to now connect with me directly and pay me in small tickets or so on. And that is a new way. But equally, there may be something which says, okay, I'm running this great, anti whatever effort, and I need to be supported, and people will support me. So paywall in itself, I don't think is the solution to this problem.
Okay, last comments to Rajesh.
No, I agree with Govind. It's a chicken and egg situation, really, because Indian companies have tried paywall, and people pay for quality, and it's nothing to do with whether it's fact checked or misinformation. They basically want to look at what is it that they don't get anywhere else, which actually makes them feel fulfilled once they have gone through it. It's very tough. In the US, New York Times has tried and done well. In India, it's in the very, very early stages, and that may not necessarily be the thing. And to give only fact-checked, authentic information is becoming a challenge, I admit. And it's not very easy. I don't really know what the solution is so far.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. At least we've got a conversation started. Thank you very much, Rajesh, Govindraj, and Baybars, for joining us and taking out the time today for this conversation.
Thank you.
Handing it back to the host.
Thank you.
To all our esteemed panelists for such an insightful conversation. Thank you to all our wonderful audience as well. Please stay tuned for more such exciting conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.